I'm Todd. I just bought a new place. I guess it was a year ago, and so it's up in Lakewood. And I don't know. I always wanted to build like I had at my old house. I don't know. It was just like trees stacked on top of trees in this little backyard, and so I don't know. I always wanted a bonsai garden, and so I don't know. I met a woman. She moved in, and then we got married, and so we decided we needed a larger home. So we did that. But that part of the thing is, like, if we get a bigger home, I want to build a bonsai garden. She wanted to build a ceramic studio. So that's kind of how that's kind of played out. So we're building her a ceramic studio too. But yeah, there were a lot, and I'll talk about this as I'm working on this tree. But there's a lot of like a learning curve moving to a new place, and I didn't expect that to be like as severe as it was last year going to this year, because where I was living before, it was just a house in a small backyard, and now where I've moved to, it was like an old horse property. So basically all my trees were in this giant field, and so like over last year I had shade cloth up, but also my water, I was using well water. And so I had looked, and the pH was low, but I didn't get it tested for like dissolved content. It's like different minerals and stuff like that. So as the summer went on, I started noticing like buildup on trees that hadn't been there before. So then going into winter, I don't know, I had trees that were very weak. And so like I lost more trees over this winter than I had before. And so I've had to like adjust and figure out like everything that was going on, what I need to do to fix that problem. And so I don't know, but I was talking to Ryan Neal about it, because I know he'd taken some lumps in the past with like heat and different things that he had, and he was saying, you know, you don't become an expert by success. And so it's like I kind of had to take that to heart. So it's like I learned a lot. That has nothing to do with this Pinyon, but just in general, you know, it's like moving and learning and stuff like that at my new facility. It's great, but there was a big learning curve that went into that. So that's just kind of we're always learning, I guess. So this is a pinyon pine. This came from New Mexico. And so while I'm talking here, I'm just going to kind of clean up anything that I know I'm not going to use, or branches that are dead in here. So, but when I'm looking at this, it's like this has, I don't know how well you can see it, but in here, like this has nice deadwood. This whole thing right here is all deadwood, and it comes up into here. This has some deadwood back here. This is kind of straight. But I mean, that's an option. Do you take this out and gin it, and then you have this line here and then a change of direction, and you use maybe this as the trunk line continuation? You know, it's like that's a thought. And the first, when I was looking at this, it's like, oh, well, maybe you use this and you do like a mother-daughter type thing. But as the more and more I look at it, it's like, it's just, that's very straight. And so I think if we go in here, I'm going to tilt this forward a little, and then I'll mark the front. Does anyone here have pinyon pines? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a few, right? Pinyons are a little tricky, and part of it, I think, is because like where these come from. Can I get a hand up here for a second? Where they come from, will you just take this block and put it back here? Perfect. Where they come from, it's kind of like, it's pretty much the desert, you know? And so if you go to dig these and like the sand is dry, they just fall apart, right? So trees, a lot of trees, at least that's where this one came from. You can get them in kind of southwestern Colorado, and you can dig them and they grow in rock. So the trees that we had at the ABS convention for that workshop, they all came out of rock. So they, like, the roots are a little more confined. Where this is, like, that's part of the reason why this container is so big, because it's like you have to trench it and dig a root ball. Okay, so that's why the thing. So when I'm collecting like pinyons or one seeds that come from New Mexico, I mean, like, the success rate is maybe 50-60%, where the trees that I get out of rock are probably 90+%. Okay, so it's a lot trickier. All right, so I think I'm gonna make, let me look at my front. So I think, let's come in here. I'll cut this, and then I'll mark it.
Can you do a wedge cut on Pinyon's side?
Sure. You can, but I've also noticed, like, and two, if we do gin this, which I'm thinking about, we'll take one of these branches and we'll bend it and see, but I found that pinyon pines are pretty flexible. So I haven't, whenever I've been working on them, I've never had like an issue or a moment where I needed to wedge cut a pinyon versus like the ponderosas or limbers or anything like that. So.
Can you say a few words about selecting the front?
Yep, so what I'm doing here, and when I'm looking at this front, I was just gonna turn it around after I mark it, but I'm looking, like, this deadwood in the front here, and I'll kind of come in here. So this deadwood in here, this is really nice, and then if you can see here, like, this has really nice movement all up through here, right? And on this back corner, and you also catch that root, so that feels like a good wide sturdy base. And if we look at the back here, the back portion here, like, that's, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's not as interesting. This is pretty straight. Whereas the front, you get these curves. So my front is where kind of this, change this just a little, where this wedges, and then we have kind of that piece of copper wire in there, if you can see that all right. Okay, so this is going to be my front. So I think if this, I think I'm going to take this out because it just seems pretty straight. All right, let's do that. Or is there a valid argument as to why I should keep it? I'm willing to hear that as well. No? All right. So I'm going to cut this out. So whenever I'm taking out branches like this, like, I'm going to bend this and see how flexible is this. So right, yeah, all right. So that's a pretty big branch, and it tears, but it's still, like, even there the cambium's still attached, so this hasn't, all right, so there it cracked. So we're at, whatever that is, 180 degrees, and it breaks. So I'll just throw this here. So that's one way you can tell, like, how flexible a tree is, because I've worked on trees before, or maybe it's a black pine, and it's like, oh, this should be pretty, like, I think it's pretty flexible, the branches aren't that big, and then you cut something off and you bend it and it just snaps in half, right? So by doing this, and you can kind of test, you can see how flexible the branch is. All right, so in option 2, yeah. I'm gonna keep this for right now. I'm gonna see if we can use this. We may not, but I'm gonna lay the rest of this out, okay? Because I wonder, like, this is straight, but it's like, is it better if we pull stuff down and then we kind of have this kind of flowing up top? So I'm gonna keep this for right now, and I'm gonna set structure. So when I'm looking at this, it's like one of these two branches here needs to come down, and one of them too needs to come up as kind of the extension of this trunk line. Because I think, like, if this comes down and we can shorten this, then we can use this branch here, we can push in the back.
Todd, I have a quick question.
Uh-huh.
So say it's like a tree you really like, you know, and you're thinking about making a big decision of moving something big.
Uh-huh.
Do you have like an approach to that? Like what is your...
I'm taking this out right now, actually. Because I just figured this out. Do I what?
So do you have like an approach, like it's a tree you really like, you know, and your approach could be like, I'm gonna get, you know, 3 people's opinions or sleep on it or...
Yeah, so there are trees that I've sat on for years and just looked at. Part of it was because, like, I wasn't sure what to do with it. It's like, I know like this tree is great, but it has like maybe this really long branch over here, and like and there's a really long branch here. And so I just kept looking at it. And one of the options is like, do you cascade it, or do you like basically a 90-degree angle and bring it up? And so I sat on it and I sat on it and I sat on it, and then finally one day I was looking down at it, and it's like, oh, here's the front, this whole branch needs to go, you have to build the tree out of this. But then what that entailed was the branch that I was like basically building the whole tree out, it was like this big. So I had to put, and it was up like this, right? So then you had to put like a wedge cut in this. And so if that wedge cut fails, then the tree's dead, you know? So it's like a lot of pressure on stuff like that. So you kind of have to get like just prepared and think ahead on it. And like I did all the work and the tree was fine, you know, but it was, so I do many times just sit on trees or like people would come over, it's like, well, what would you do with that tree? You know, because doing like the initial structure on a tree is like it's the most difficult part, and it's also like you're setting the bones for what the tree's gonna look like, you know, so I don't know. So you're creating what the tree will look like in the future from that one point. So it's like it's good to get it right from the beginning, you know, because after that it's just going to be harder to change it or harder to, you know, adjust anything. Does everyone know what pinions smell like?
Smells good.
Yes? Here, I'm just gonna, just because they're so aromatic, they're incredible. Here, so just pass these around. However you want to do it better. Yeah, just pass them. But pinyon pines are so like fragrant. They're incredible. So here, I'm gonna make deadwood out of this. We'll turn this into gins.
Peeling bark right now?
I'm peeling bark, and then I'm just gonna take off maybe take out some little pieces of wood. So one thing about pinions too, they're called this outlier because they don't respond like a lot of other trees, right? So there was a time where I figured that pinions were like a multi-flush pine because they'll put out long candles, like Scots pine and like short needle pines, short needle single flush pines, and like you could go in and if you cut all the candles, it'll set another set like black pines do, Japanese black pines, and it'll push again, but it pushes a bright blue juvenile foliage. So the foliage is like, it's bright blue and it's very spiky. I don't know, if I find any, I'll cut it off, well, on this I probably won't if I need it, but if I find some, I'll show it to you. But it's bright blue, yeah, and it's very spiky. So it's really, it's interesting that it does it. So I don't really address them as much as like a multi-flush. So too, like after this work, it's a little like we're in August now, so I don't think it will happen now. But if this was earlier in the year and I was designing a tree like this, what it would probably do is it would set a set of buds and it would push all juvenile. So if it puts juvenile and you don't touch it and just let it do it, it'll set buds, and then next year it'll push regular foliage. Regular needles. But a lot of times after an initial styling, I just kind of count on like that next push is going to be juvenile. Depending on, it's almost like junipers where if you take off like too much foliage or a lot of foliage, they'll push juvenile as well. So these will set those buds and push that juvenile foliage.
What's the best time of year to work on it?
I mean, right now is not bad because like these needles they've hardened off. So on these usually, like I approach these as kind of a short needle single flush. So if you can either do it like before they start pushing or once they hardened off. So right around this time is not a bad time to work on. What about them?
It's the same sort of approach and principles and everything.
I mean, my gut feeling is yes, but I've never worked on a single needle pinyon. I've seen them because I've gone to California and gone through the desert. There's some single needle pinions there, so I've seen them, but I've never wired one. I've never. So my gut is yes, but I don't know. I can't.
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah, I can't say with any, whoa, I did this and then that happened. So, I mean, I don't know if there's a lot of people that have worked on single needle. The first time I saw one, actually, Jerry Morris had one at Harold Sasaki's place, and Jerry I think he had grafted it onto Scots pine, or maybe he grafted it onto a pinyon, but that was the first time I'd seen it there. So all right, we're almost done with this, and then but yeah, so one thing too with some pines like ponderosas, maybe it's like if you fertilize it too much you get longer needles, but these you can fertilize them like crazy and you're not going to ever get needles that are like out of proportion or anything like that. So yeah, so one thing with my with my space now that I have, and I was like kind of trying to adjust. So I was on well water, and so, but I was lucky enough to where there was a switch in the house to where I could switch from well water to city water. So then the well water, the pH there was 6.4. So it was really good for plants, but it was very hard, right? So then I switch over to city water, and city water was 8.6. So the pH was really high. So what I did is I bought a dosatron system. So I don't know if any of you know what that is, but it's like it's an injector. And so I run the water through that, and then I have this tube that goes into this product called pH Down, and it lowers the pH. And then I bought another one that goes into a bucket that has fish, like a fish and seaweed fertilizer in there from Neptune's Harvest, and then Grow Big. And so I have both of those in there. So then what I can do is the pH, I've lowered it to 6.5. So like this winter with water, I totally like geeked out with water and trying to get, and because too, there's, depending if you're on city water and you have hard water, you can also add, it's called Protec, and it's like a silica base. And so if you have like higher pH, what it does, it binds to the roots, and then it allows trees that are getting water with higher pH to take up more nutrients. So it's like, it's a rabbit hole. It's a pretty deep rabbit hole that you can, Paul's shaking his head because he knows, that you can go down with all that stuff. So, and then there's like RO water and all, it just gets crazier and crazier. But
Todd, you had mentioned that you saw some buildup. Was that on like the cuts that you had made last year, coming out from the stem?
the buildup?
Yeah.
No, so the buildup was on, I noticed it on the containers. And which was interesting because I'd gone to like Vegas and seen people there, places where they have hard water, and it's like you see buildup on their containers. And like I lived on like Colfax and Sheridan basically, so it's Denver water, never had any issues with that. And so, but then I started seeing just buildup on all the containers. It's like, oh, that's not good. So then got water tested, and like the hardness was 11. Okay, so then what was it? The dissolved like mineral content or whatever was like 600. And so with city water, I tested it today, it's like 100, and that's like acceptable. So my water was all out of whack, and so that was my mistake, because I thought being on well water, and I was thinking of like the mountains, but where the aquifer is for Denver, it's sandstone that it's going through. So it's depositing all these minerals, and it's like, that's why, like, part of the reason why Red Rocks is red, because of all this iron content. So, yeah, it was a big learning curve. So,
What do you think about grain barrels?
yeah, no, so that was one thing too I started thinking about, because not necessarily on my house, but where, like, I have where my workshop is, it's an old pole barn. And so there's, like, the drains that come off of that, it's like, oh, I could put a couple cisterns there, and collect rainwater that way too. Yeah, so I have class, like, from my people in town for class, like, from today till Sunday. And so that was actually one of the things we were discussing today in class, was collecting rainwater. All right, so here, I'm gonna set structure first. So this branch here is gonna go in the back. This branch, I think we can shorten. Do you even take that out? All right, so this is what I think I'm gonna do. I'm gonna shorten, let me turn this on. This branch here, which you can barely see, is gonna go in the back here. I think this branch, I'm gonna pull this up, and I'm gonna drop this down, okay? So this here, that's gonna come down, this will come up, and then I'll build like secondary pads out of this and this. Same with this, okay? I don't know about this branch here, whether this is used or not, because we have this long internode before we have any foliage. I don't know if I could cut it back to there. I don't know if that's necessary.
Is there a way to get needles to grow back on that?
On this?
Yeah,
I mean, these will bud back pretty well.
I thought they would.
Yeah, they will, because see, like here, it's still kind of it hasn't barked over, so this still has a shot. It still has a shot.
How long did the needle stay on?
You want to move over here? That's it, man? I can move over.
How long did the needle stay on for?
How long what?
Do the needles stay on front?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on these, they'll stay on for 3 years. So after 3 years, then the old needles will fall off, right? But then the tree keeps regenerating needles every year. But in the fall, those 3rd-year needles will drop off.
Is that just on pinions or all
I mean, bristle cones will hold needles for
What about like the ponderosas?
forever, right? But ponderosas are 3 years.
Okay.
Limber, I think most species they'll hold foliage for other than deciduous, but spruces, they'll hold needles for at least 3 years, and then start shedding them. But for most pines, it's 3 years. All right, so I'm going to come here. We'll push this back.
What size is that?
6. This is 6 gauge copper wire.
How long will that take to set?
So yeah, on these, I mean, I usually wait until the wire's biting in, like at least 50%. And so on these trees too, because they're kind of like they're a little spongy, the bark is, and so you may have to, my guess is, like it may bite in and then you may have to take it off and then rewire it. So it depends on like how long the wire's going to stay on will depend on like how healthy the tree is, because in the fall is when it'll expand and put on like the branches will put on girth, and so that's when a lot of the times when you'll get the wire to start biting in. So in the fall you have to really kind of keep an eye on trees and make sure that, hold on, especially for like deciduous. I mean, you wire deciduous and within a couple months you're going to get wire biting in. So, but yeah, in the fall is when these will really start biting in. And so sometimes if I have a tree that's really bit in, I notice over the winter, it's like, well, I'll just wait, because over winter it's not going to like expand anymore, but also if you take off the wire and you damage the tree, it's also not going to heal over winter because it's dormant on a lot of these conifers. So then I'll just wait until the spring and take it off, because then it's like they're going to do a big push of resources and they'll be able to mend any tissue that you may have damaged while you're taking the wire off. All right. So here, I'm just setting structure. I'm going to take this off too. So here, we'll just check with this even. All right, so still, you can bend that quite a bit. All right, so I'm just trying to figure out my wiring scheme here. So yeah, so here's where I am right now. So here's the front. So I brought this I kept up. So I didn't just drop this down, right? I brought this up, and then I brought this down, and then it kind of comes up, and then this drops down. I brought this back. So what I'm gonna do with these larger kind of secondary branches is I'll drop these down into other pads. And then like this right here, right? I have these two branches right here, so I brought this up. So then what I'll do is I'll make a pad up here. So I'll turn this into, and have multiple pads as this drops down, and then I'll make multiple pads out of this, and then this up here somewhere will be the apex, okay?
Todd, do you ever have to use raffia on Pinyon?
Say that again?
Do you ever have to use raffia on Pinyon?
I never have. I've never used raffia on Pinyon. And yeah, like we were talking about putting wedge cuts on them. I've never done that. I don't know, they just seem, all the pinions that I've worked on are so flexible that I haven't ever had to put raffia on them. There are, like ponderosas, I don't ever put raffia. It's like if I need to do something, I'll wedge cut those. Limbers, like if you need to do like a big move, I've wedge cut those. I've also, on limbers, if you're gonna put raffia on, I've used dry raffia. Because wet raffia, like it stretches, but it also, I don't know if like, because a lot of times when you're moving, look at that piece of dead wood that's just kind of hanging out there. Huh. When you're moving, when the branches are still kind of punky like this, or soft on limber, I don't know if like they absorb water or what, but I've had them to where I've raffied them with wet raffia and they've broken. Like that, they still crack, because limbers, like they just snap. Doug firs will do that too, they'll just snap. A lot of times when they have older branches, and so with trees like that, I tend to use dry raffia on them. And so, yeah, like last year I was working, we had a limber in class, and there was this branch that we had to move, and it's like we needed to move it a long way. So, but it's like, well, we got it, let's just move it. So we moved it, and then we were sitting there and we were watching. It's like, wow, we really moved that a long way, and then it broke off. I've never had, like usually while you're in the process it breaks. Once you set it to a location you want it and you're good, it's good, you know, it's not gonna break off. This one we sat there and we were looking at it, it's like, oh, that looks really good, and then it just snapped off. So
limber wasn't very limber.
yeah, I mean, I've made t-shirts that refer to that, where it's like Pinus flexilis, they're not as, you know, they're not always flexilis. But Doug firs will do the same thing. I've noticed that they can just, I haven't had it to where, you know, I put a bend on and then they break, but they just kind of snap sometimes, so. So here with these, I'm just trying to find some space.
I guess she's not gonna see it. Go back. This is your knife on the floor right there.
Space for these kind of secondary branches. And then here at the end, it's like, how long, right? How long do we want this to be? This directional branch. This feels a little long. So let's shorten this back into here. Okay. yeah, so I'll finish setting the structure of these kind of smaller branches, and then I'll show you what we have. So one thing too, when I've like repotted these, the first time I ever dealt with them, I went with Jerry Morris to Utah, and so we were out there, and we were trying to get them collect trees out of sandstone. So I think we lost every single one because it was just it's so difficult out there to get them. But when I've repotted these, the ones that I've gotten from New Mexico or dug out of the ground, like that first year, I don't know, I feel like I kind of have to really watch them and kind of baby them, because going from all that soil, and this one, like this too, this will be a challenge, because going from all this like kind of sandy, I mean, it's like it's sand, and then taking this tree and putting it into a bonsai container. I mean, maybe that's where like doing it in steps would be maybe a better option. I tend to just try to do it all in one shot. And so like for the first year, I feel like I really have to baby them, to kind of wash the water and keep them out of a lot of sunlight for a long time, just to get them to recover. So that's what I've found.
So what would your soil mixture be when you get it all said and done? When you put it into bonsai soil?
It'd be a 1-1-1 mix.
What-
Yeah, so I use like lava, pumice, and akadama. That's what I use for everything. And so for that, too, like for these trees out here, because these being from New Mexico, and New Mexico gets cold, but I don't know, whenever I've left like pinyons out, so like this tree, all my one seeds, anything that comes from New Mexico, I put it in a greenhouse. And it'll still get cold. Like the one I have now only gets down to 34. That's about as cold as it gets. So even conifers can still get dormancy, but it's not as bad, right, as being outdoors. And I may even change that this year to maybe it gets down to 30 or the upper 28s, depending on the species of trees I have in there. So if I have like tridents in there or Japanese maples, I probably can't do that. But if I just keep like conifers in there, I can keep it cooler. Keep it cooler than. Oh, so yeah, I guess my point was that I've kept these outdoors, and then I've lost them. Whereas if I've kept them and they like established trees, whereas if I've kept them in a greenhouse, they've always done well coming out of the winter. So.
How soon do you start fertilizing a tree that you collected?
So that first year, I usually don't, like a lot of times I don't fertilize till the fall. But two, that was partially when I was using like some synthetic fertilizers, but now I'm using just organic. And so actually yesterday I fertilized trees that I had dug this year. I fertilized them, but I'm using with like that Dr. Earth, which is Dr. Earth Neptune's Harvest, which is a 3-1-2. And I've even kind of watered that down a little more. So we just watered it yesterday. Jamie watered them with, so I watered everything. But for the most part, I won't fertilize most things until the fall. Because if you're gonna fertilize anything and you don't fertilize, like let's say you miss all year, the most important time to fertilize is in the fall, right? Before the trees are, as they're getting ready for their dormancy. That's the most important time to fertilize. So.
What's the downside of fertilizing earlier?
Fertilizing early. I guess if there's not an established like root system, or maybe the trees aren't taking up a lot of water, after you collect them, and so then you can get like maybe salt builds up, or you can like damage what roots are in there. Trees don't need fertilizer, right, to live. So that's kind of one thing, like when you're taking them out of the mountains or wherever you're getting them, and then you're putting them in this grow box, it's like just let kind of hands off, and just kind of let the tree do its thing, and just, because it doesn't need fertilizer to live. So that's kind of, and you could burn roots depending, like too. I used to use like Miracle Grow a lot, and that's, I don't know, 25 something. It's really high, so I always worried, maybe you could burn roots with that. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see. So there's two. I got some stuff today from, it's like biochar from, I don't know if anyone's heard of like Harry Harrington, and there's a Dr. Karen over in Europe, and they've created this whole thing. And so I wrote them. It's like, hey, can I get some? And so she sent me these samples. So like that was something too, where it's like, I want to try that. So it's like maybe I take 10 trees that are, we were talking about that today too. Les was like, well, how scientific are you going to be? So what I'm going to do is take like 10 spruces from one area that I've collected, and it's like put all the same, like this biochar on those, and it's like, let's see how they respond versus trees that didn't. So it'll be an interesting test to see.
And if you don't, you can get biochar locally from pond supply or aquarium supply.
Oh, you can. Well,
Using the filtration.
so I got mine from a little further, so I'll have to see. Yeah, that's great that they have it over here. Yeah, because there's all sorts of like microbes and different things in there. So I'm pretty curious as to how that's going to work.
And I will say, the local stuff is not great. It sounds like the stuff you're getting is inoculated with microorganisms. The stuff you get locally is not, but it is porous and ready to receive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I just contacted the lady.
Okay.
Well, I wrote Harry Harrington, and I was like, hey, can you ship this to the United States? And he's like, well, because it's only good for like a certain amount of time because of the living microbes that are in there. So I wrote Harry. It's like, hey, can I get some of this? And he's like, I don't have any contact. Dr. Karen. So I wrote her, and she's like, sure, I can. Like they only have a few things left. So I think like now I have to wait till next year to get another supply because they have to create it. So I don't know. I haven't used it. I can't say anything, but I'm kind of excited about that. So
That type of stuff's only gonna work on like organic substrate though. You can't use that on like 111. There's no like microbial growth on rocks.
the what?
You're gonna have to use that on a totally organic substrate. Like trying to use it on rocks, it's not gonna grow like microbial life.
Right, but the Akadama, there's still native soil in there, which will hold on to that. And two, Akadama has that cation exchange, so it'll grab onto that too. Lava won't, pumice won't, right, for the most part, unless it's like just kind of sitting in the water. But that's part of the reason why like you use Akadama, because it has a charge and it's able to hold on to nutrients. So, but two, like one of the biochar, it's charcoal. So like you sprinkle that on there, and so that'll also like absorb different things, so.
It's kind of a different approach though. I mean, it's organic versus inorganic, right? Essentially.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so my thing is like for the most part, I want to be in charge of everything that goes in. And it's like I used turfus and I used pine bark for years and years, and then like studying with Ryan and seeing how his trees are, and I've done that. I've done that switch.
How long does it take the bark to get brown and old?
For what?
The bark to get brown and old.
Oh, that's a good question too. So I think it depends on the species of tree. So I think some trees, like this branch here, or this branch here. I don't know, this branch could be maybe 20 or 30 years old, you know, and there's still portions of it that haven't barked up. But then there's some trees where you have a 20 or 30-year-old branch and they'll have bark on them. So, all right, here, I'll turn this around so you can kind of see how when I'm bringing this branch down, let me double check here. All right, how I've started to like create different layers, right? So I haven't touched this yet, but I've done some in here, right? So like some of these branches that are further up, okay, I'm keeping them higher than these branches here. So instead of like dropping this and having just one giant branch, I'm making kind of multiple pads out of this.
Todd, do pinyon pines have like a certain way that the branch structure grows that's different than other pines?
I mean, so when I've seen when I've seen like younger ones, they are like just very like with most things, like very symmetrical. But a lot of them, like a lot of them are just kind of up and out, like shrubby. A lot of these though, they stay very small. Like there aren't a whole lot of, I mean, I don't think there's, I don't know what the tallest one is. That'd be interesting to see like what is the biggest pinyon pine. But they're, all the ones that I've seen, all the ones that I'm collecting, they're all very, do you know Paul?
Tallest?
The tallest.
30 to maybe 40 feet tall.
40?
I've seen 30.
Oh. All right, well all the ones I've seen in the desert, they're probably not over 10. So maybe that's just the conditions that they're growing in. I didn't know they got 40 feet tall.
Yeah, I'm saying that's
Mexico, it's almost, yeah,
I've
it's
seen
right
it.
there in the Silver City.
So you've seen 30 feet tall. All right, so they get pretty big. But I don't know, like there are some trees, like if you go to the mountain, you see like bristlecones, like they have a very recognizable form. Limber pines have a very recognizable form when you're up in the mountains, because a lot of them are like this multi-apex kind of branches growing up. You know, stuff has died, and so I guess with the pinyon pines that I've seen, the majority of them they're very compact. They're compact, but they're pretty short. You know, the ones that are in the desert that I've seen. So yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, I should look up largest pinyon.
If you ever go to Atkins Tree Farm, it's got some pretty huge ones.
Go where?
Atkins, is it?
Atkins. Where is that located?
Kind of towards Sheffield.
That's all nursery stock, or like field grown.
It's a nursery, but at the owner's residence, he's got two of these for 50
Uh-huh.
They're probably the biggest pinions I've ever seen.
See the golf courses too, you notice, they're all over the place, you start to notice them.
What
So that's-
with?
That's not their native range, right?
No.
So a lot of these are like landscape trees that get really big. I would agree in the native range are probably looking at more like 15 feet.
All right.
Down in Mexico.
All right. So here that feels a little better. That 15 feet in the native. All right. So what I've done here with this back branch, and here's our front. So I brought this down and then back this way. So I'm trying to use this back branch so I can get like a little peekaboo over here, but then also filling in this area right here. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to accomplish with this back branch. So I'm not exactly sure. I know this will come down, so maybe I'll set that. But like that's the thing with some of these. It's like I don't know. You have like general ideas, but it's like I don't know what this is gonna look like in the end. And sometimes like I'll be doing a demo and it's like the whole thing is just completely bushy. It's like I don't even know if this is going to turn out into a good tree, but you have to kind of like follow and trust the process, right? So it's like bringing this branch down, right, and making multiple branches. It's like okay, and making nice paths. It's like fine, this will come into play. This originates in the back, so I want to keep it in the back. So there's these like structural rules that you have to follow. And if you keep and follow those structural rules, it's like I need something here, I need something here. This, instead of having like the apex out front, it's like I'm going to pull it back. Maybe I drop some of this down, and so we get some depth. Maybe this comes here, and then maybe this is the apex, right? So it's like there's just these structural hierarchies, right? This originates in the front of this branch, and it's below like this branch up here. So it's like when I drop this down, this needs to stay in front of this and also needs to stay below it, you know? So it's like that's not always 100% like how the rules like work out in the end, but for the most part, you know, if you stand by the structural hierarchy, it just kind of things fall into place. So actually, let's do that. So I think this will probably be the apex. And this will probably drop down. So I'm going to wire this up to here, and we'll set this, and we'll set that, and we'll see what that looks like.
You say it's all about setting that first branch, and you build the rest of your tree.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, first branch. Woo! There's a reason I called my company, you know, my business First Branch, because part of it. You know, it's like, okay, what is a name that everyone, or something that's related to bonsai that everyone will like associate with and understand and remember? It's like, well, like your first branch. Like now the terminology's changed, so it's like directional branch, right? But it's like your first branch. And so sometimes, like, if you don't know, like that's the thing too, if you don't necessarily know like what to do with a tree, like a lot of times it's like I'm not exactly sure, but I know this is going to be the first branch, and I want it here, so I'll set that. And then like what's the second branch, you know, and the side branch, and you just kind of like go through it and just start placing things. I was also like a graphic designer, and so I don't know, does anyone here have like, well, someone does, like dogs or cats, right, pets? So I worked for Kong, like the little red honeycomb shaped toy, so I was an art director for that company. So like part of it too, it's like, okay, where do you need white space, or where do you need foliage, you know? So it's like there's some things like that you can kind of take into account when you're laying out the tree. It's like, okay, this part here is very congested. How can I change that? And maybe I need more white space here. So that's kind of, I don't know, I guess like kind of how I look at things.
So negative space has changed to white space?
Yeah. Well, so with Kong, we used a lot of, like the colors were red and white. Basically, all the packaging was like very white, so it's like just white space, you know. Yeah, negative space, same thing.
That maybe Daryl had changed the nomenclature.
The what?
Thought maybe Daryl had changed the nomenclature.
Oh, well,
Being a big fan.
it's possible. All right, let me see how I'm doing here. I'm going to push here, and then I'm going to come.
So how long ago was that tree collected?
Say that again?
How long ago was that collected?
3 years ago. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna actually come here.
Following up that question, did it go directly into the plastic pot, or did you put it in wood first?
No, I put it right into,
And
right
how
into.
much root did you have to remove?
I mean, so I probably dug a root ball that was like close to this size, and then like what I usually do with these is I'll go around the edge with just a chopstick, and I'll pull off like just loose dirt. I'll go underneath, pull off loose dirt, and then I'll start pushing this in, because if it's just loose dirt, you don't need it, right? And it's like it's just gonna hold water, nothing's growing in it, and I'll take it back until I start like hitting maybe a big structural root, or if there's a big structural root and there's no fine roots on it, maybe I can push that in a little further until I start like kind of seeing some fine roots in there, and then once I hit that, then I pretty much stop. But I'll go around like the whole, and maybe this root ball was even this big, and it's like I'll take it down, because that's the thing, like once too, if you have it on the table, you're doing root work, if it falls apart on the table, you've just killed a tree, you know? So it's like I'll take it to where it's like, okay, it'll fit in this container, so I'm just gonna leave it, you know? It's like maybe I could have gotten it in a little further. I'll deal with that later, just because they're harder to collect. All right, so here I'll show you. I'm going to try to get a little more motion there. Yeah, so I'm just trying to, like now I'm trying to, yeah, what does it look like from where you guys are sitting? Yeah, so trying to fill in this area with this, and then now I'm going to pull this back, and maybe I drop some of this down here, like maybe some of this gets dropped down into here, but like as you're looking at this, and this will kick out here, right? We'll get something in here, so we have a few little peekaboos through there. But then now it's like I'm trying to also, while I'm doing this, create a tree that's beautiful from like 360 degrees, right? I don't want like a one-sided kind of tree.
So what's a safe percentage of foliage you can remove on a tree like this?
Right. I mean, so right now,
50%.
I mean, right now I'm at 50% at least, but it's all from here, right? So now what I'm keeping here is I'm hardly taking anything off of this. So I'm not that worried, because I have enough foliage here. And so too, like once you start laying these trees out, and you take that foliage and spread it out, there's a lot more, like part of the trick is being able to make a tree look fuller than it actually is by spreading them out, but there's a lot more foliage on this tree than we think there is, you know? So, I mean, I don't know, 70%? That's probably pushing it a little. We'll say that's pushing it a little.
Yeah, but now the roots don't have to support everything you took off. You just have to feed what's left.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. It's like, okay, I just took off 80% of the foliage, but all of that foliage is weak. The 20% that's left is all like healthy, good foliage, and maybe the tree's all right. So yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, so I'm just gonna leave, so whenever I do initial stylings too, I try to leave a little more foliage. It's like, yeah, there's some, like, you know, it's like, okay, you want alternating branches. It's like, well, this tree doesn't have the foliage to have alternating branches throughout, or else you would probably lose a lot more foliage. So it's like, I'm not gonna do that. So there are times where, yeah, I'll leave 3s and like portions that are in the long run, like flaws, but it's like you just leave them during the initial styling so you can get the tree to recover quicker.
How long will that wire have to stay on before the tree has been trained to stay in that position?
Right, so on these, like these will do it, like Doug firs too, you have to wire them several times, and a lot of times on them they still like to droop, but I mean a tree like this with those branches, I don't know, it could be like 5-6 years before you can have like the structure off, but then you'll still be wiring the finer branches, maybe even a little more. Yeah, a lot of that, like I was saying, it will depend on the vigor of the tree. And so when it puts on a lot of vascular tissue, that's what, and then, yeah, the vascular tissue, which then creates the wire to bite in, that's what will keep the branches in place, so. All right, so I have this little outlier right here, so I'm gonna splice that in. So I'm just gonna take this wire and cut it at an angle. And then I can slip it in between the branch, this big structural branch, and the structural wire there. You just splice it in, and then that'll secure it. Now I can wire this. Yeah, so too on this tree, maybe I'll find a spot where I can do it, but I'm not cleaning like also as many of the needles facing down, you know, as I would on some other like trees that are maybe a little more established. All right, what is that look like? So I want this poking through here. And then I think this needs to go this way. All right, here, so now we're up here. So anyone that has pinions, when do you usually start fertilizing?
I just got it.
Oh, so it's from the workshop?
Yeah.
I know, so Mike Britton collected the trees for the workshop, and he got some just magnificent pinions. Or him and Larry, maybe they both went, I forget, but it was just Mike, but they got some great pinions.
I found my response better when I start fertilizing in the spring.
Yeah.
I get more candles and better even growth throughout.
Have you ever noticed if you do, because sometimes junipers, if you over fertilize them, or just like you really hit them hard, they'll actually, because they have so much energy, they'll push juvenile. Have you ever noticed with pinions, if you over fertilize, if they'd ever like push juvenile growth.
I couldn't tell you if it was that or if it was me repotting or wiring.
Uh-huh.
If you, any stress, and they'll push them.
Right.
So I'm not, it could have been in kind of conjunction with fertilizer, but I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah.
Will you do any aftercare after?
So yeah, with this tree, I don't know. It's like all the bends went pretty well. You know, it's like it's pretty flexible, so I'm not that worried about anything. Like nothing is cracked, you know, yet, and nothing's broken. So what I'll probably do is put it into maybe a little shadier location than where it is, but I'll fertilize this. I'll fertilize, yeah, because we've gotten a reprieve from some of that heat. And this, I don't know, this year hasn't been too bad. You know, it's like it's been very, very wet and but when we were in the 90s, I'm not fertilizing during that time. But now that we're in like the 80s for the next few days, I'll probably fertilize. Even though I did it Tuesday, maybe I'll fertilize this. I'll have to look at the weather, but maybe like Sunday or some day before we start getting those 90s again. But yeah, I'll protect this. I mean, part of it too, because like I've taken out a lot of the foliage. I'll protect it, but I'll also have to watch the watering because now it's not going to take up, like maybe I was watering every day, you know, once a day, maybe twice a day, whatever, if it was like really hot. Maybe now I only have to water every other day. So I'll have to watch and see like how does it do with water uptake. Because it will take up less water than it was before. So. How are we doing? 30 minutes.
Todd, why would you not fertilize when it's warm?
Yeah, because trees, like a lot of our trees, when they get, like in the spring when they're growing, it's kind of interesting. I used to go, like I traveled a lot more than I do, and so like Charlie was watering trees, and then in the evening my wife would water. And so like in the spring I'd be gone. In June where things are growing, she's like everything was really dry. And she really paid attention to that. But then once the trees have like created new foliage, and their heat and the heat of summer comes, they kind of go like dormant, and they just use like the water they're taking up to cool themselves, and they're not, you know, creating new tissue, and so they're not taking up the same amount of water. So by like not fertilizing or fertilizing during that time, there may be instances where, like depending on what you're using, like there's a buildup, maybe there's a buildup of salts in there or something because they're not going through as much water, you're not watering as much. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. I only grow deciduous trees, but deciduous you kind of want to fertilize when it's hot because their respiration is highest, so you get the most nutrients in the plant.
So you fertilize, like do you fertilize all summer long?
Right, yeah. But, you know, just one data point, I guess.
It's what?
Just one data point.
Yeah, so even like all my deciduous, I didn't fertilize them for a little bit until yesterday, you know. Well, I say that. I still had like BioGold on them in 4 locations, so they were still getting like low dosage.
Right, so you just kind of cut back.
Yeah. But some of that could have been spent too. But. All right, here's that. All right, let's set this apex, and I'm gonna try to So this branch here, right? I want to fill maybe some of this. Maybe I use part of this for the apex, but I want to use that to fill this in. And then this branch that I had in the front, it's like I have these side branches, so I can pull these into here, right, to fill in some of this area. But then I want a little bit of a counter on that side, okay? So I'm going to set this apex first. That may not hold it. So we'll come here.
Can you talk some about the deadwood you're creating because I'm afraid we're gonna run out of time and you're not gonna tell us what you're gonna do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see if I don't know if I'll have time, but I would strip like all of this. And then part of it is like I'll look at this and see where the apex is, right? And make sure that they're not necessarily on exactly the same plane or the same height.
But you're gonna keep that interesting stuff at the top, aren't you?
It's what?
You're gonna keep the interesting curvature at the top. The motion.
Yeah, it's like these are,
You're gonna keep all that.
yeah. Yeah, and then this, like I'll just peel this off,
Well, yeah.
but. All right.
I have to say I have a different opinion about that. I've been watching that during the evening and I'm waiting until the end to see what you do with that deadwood there.
Wait, watching what?
To me, I was watching just to see if you would address that question the gentleman asked here about that deadwood up at the top. And where I'm sitting, it's too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
The foliage is very light
Mm-hmm.
and thin, and that looks inverted. It's almost like reverse taper in the trunk. It's
Right.
very heavy at the top. Now that may lighten up if you strip it and bleach it, but nonetheless, it's a mess.
I mean, and so one of my thoughts too is because we have this interesting piece of deadwood right here, and it's pretty short. It's like, and this is almost like this. These two are almost similar sizes, and then we have a piece of deadwood here that's very short. So one of the options here is to actually take this down to here or somewhere in here and keep this very short to kind of, sorry, I'm talking and you're looking at the back. It's like if we shorten this, it's like, does this need to be in scale, right, with both of these two? This could also be a thing where it's like, okay, this trunk died a while ago and now it's still like really tall, you know? So there's...
It's not only tall, it's massive at the top. It doesn't taper and disappear, it just like suddenly explodes.
Right.
And it's too much, in my opinion, this is my.
Wow.
It doesn't-
Wow.
Doesn't come.
It doesn't come from the tree.
I mean,
It looks clunky.
Todd, would you consider stain bending that deadwood?
Yeah, but.
is what?
Would you consider stain bending that long straight deadwood?
This?
Yeah.
I mean, you could. Let's just fix this. No, I see what you're, I do see what you're saying. And two, it's like this is very, like it's light, like up here. Yeah, it's light and this is fairly heavy. So let's just, I'm open to other interpretations, even if they're wrong. I'm just kidding. No, that's one of the things like when I have class, it's like that I really enjoy is because like a lot of the students when we're looking at things that are difficult, you know, and it's like maybe I've been looking at something for a while and it's like I kind of have like a kind of perceived notion in my head and someone else is like, well, no, what about this? It's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So that, like collaboration, that's one of the things, like even on my website, when I like talk about classes and different things on there, it's like that's one of the things that I really do enjoy about it. It's like collaboration and getting other ideas and perspectives and things. So
I think this is a much more interesting view right now.
I do too. I think you're right.
We need to shed samplers.
Yeah. I like it.
You can always take it off later. I mean, there's always the just live with it for a bit.
There are, and sometimes, yeah, there are. But it's like, all right,
I
it's,
have a hard time putting it back.
but too, it's like I see. What's your name? Rich. I see what Rich was saying. So it's like, let's just do it.
So how long would that deadwood live there anyway before it rotted?
How long?
Would the deadwood have stayed before it rotted away?
Well, I mean, here in Colorado, it would stay a long time. You would probably lose it more from like heavy winds or getting like winds with like snow or sand that would eventually break it off. So
I hear it hails here once in a while.
it's what?
It hails here once in a while.
Well, or hail. Yeah, I know. Hail this year has been crazy.
Oh, I'm glad I brought it up. It's great. I was sitting there.
Todd, have you noticed if the wood on Pinyon pines is any more or less resilient than the other pines?
Like what? Pinions from here versus like Colorado versus New Mexico, or what are you?
More Pinyon pine versus ponderosa versus limber. Any differences in those wood qualities?
I mean, I think where we are, I think pinions, I think ponderosas and limbers are the toughest, versus pinions. But that, like, even one thing this year with, like, losing trees, it's like I had trees that were kind of overexposed, but some of the trees that I lost were ponderosas and limbers and bristlecones. It's like I figured, I don't think like having some of those trees hit -14 December at my house helped at all, but I don't know. I think part of it was private. It was the water, and going into winter week. But I thought my trees were, because of how things were in the past, I thought they were a lot, stronger. I thought they were a lot hardier and stronger than they were. But going into winter, they were, I think they were going in a little weak. So, but I don't think pinions are as hardy as either of those. So.
We'll say it was a brutal winter.
Yeah, it was.
A lot of it was freezing. It was also high wind and bright and sunny. It was not a great show.
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone, like whoever follows me on like Instagram, I've been putting like some updates and Facebook on my structure. So one of the things that I was gonna do over like this next winter is, because I basically built a giant pergola that's like, I don't know, 50 feet by 66 feet. Like that's the size of the structure. And it's basically a pergola. So what I'm gonna do over this next winter is I'm gonna actually get either like 6 mil plastic or tarps and just enclose, like there's 4 sections to it, and wherever the trees are, I'm just gonna put a tarp around there. So basically it'll be, or 6 mil plastic, so it'll basically be like a open, because the top's still open like a pergola, it'll be like an open roofed greenhouse or something like that. So
Is that what you and Tom were working on?
yeah, so Tom Engelwitz from the club helped me design this thing, and yeah, it's pretty in.
So you mainly want it for wind protection?
I mean, wind is a lot of it, because so
Do anything for heat
where I live, everything's very, very exposed. And so, like I was traveling one time and Bridget was like, hey, because wind is like a huge, especially over winter, it just desiccates everything. And so over winter, I was in, I don't know where I was somewhere traveling. And Bridget, my wife, is like, it's been really windy, and I had a limber or a lodgepole pine that is probably, it's in a wooden box, it's like this tall, and the wind blew that over. And so, yeah, it's like everything was exposed. So, I mean, too, like up in Wyoming, and the guys up there, it's like I work for them, and up there it gets to like negative 30, and they have some trees outside, but it's like it's next to their house, you know, so it's like it's a little warmer there, you know, next to the house, but also it's getting, like, wind is blocking everything. I know, like, Dusty Kraft, who's in the club, he had a greenhouse, and I think for, like, part of that time, I don't even know if it was heated, but up there it got down to negative 23. He's up in Eaton. His trees came out fine because they're, like, protected from the wind. So I think mine was having this structure that I built, I'm gonna block like full sun, because where I'm at now, being basically in a field, everything was like getting full sun. So having like a reprieve from the sun in the winter is gonna help, and then also having it be able to block a lot of that wind is gonna help everything. So. So yeah, I think too much sun in the winter and wind is what are the big factors. Because too, it's like a tree's getting desiccated, maybe the container's frozen or the box is frozen, it can't take up water, you know, or if whatever water it's taking up is at a very slow rate, and everything's just getting desiccated, so. But yeah, having Tom in the club is a great architect, came in very, very handy. Because come spring, I was noticing like, oh, there's trees that are suffering, and like at what I had last year was just a shade. It was just shade cloth, you know. So then when I took that down over the winter, I had no shade, you know, because it's like I can't keep the shade cloth up over winter because of snow. So it's like everything was just exposed. So then this spring, I just took a picture of what I had, and I was like, hey, Tom, you want to help me build a permanent shade structure? And so we got on a call and worked it out. And yeah, it has like a little tokonoma in the front, like this little, it's a lean-to, but it's like it's great. And it's made out of rough cut cedar. So it's also like super expensive, but it looks great, and it smells great. It'll stay for a long time. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And then so now, like in there too, I'm landscaping. I'm starting to do like landscaping in there and put like plants and flowers and different things to really soften it up. So I put lights on there last night. So just solar lights, and you know, it's a lot of fun. I don't know, you gotta I have to remember sometimes I'm not building like a botanic gardens, I'm building a bonsai pavilion, because you can kind of get overwhelmed maybe, or not overwhelmed, but just kind of sidetracked with like all the fun little plants that you can put in there too, so. All right. Yeah, but it's in, like, my property's on, like, Wadsworth and 6th. So, it's like there's just, like, anyone that's familiar with that area, there's just this, like, little pocket of kind of like horse properties. And, yeah, so it's like right there, and I have 3/4 of an acre, you know, and so it's just, I'm lucky that I was able to get it, but there's just like one teeny little pocket there that are all like horse properties and stuff that have some land, so. All right, we're almost there. Yeah, so maybe when we're done, we'll see how much time we have. But it's like right now how this is looking, it's like what kind of container would you put this in?
So when that tree goes into the next pot,
Uh-huh.
what's the process to keep it on that angle that you created right now?
So what I would need to do, like depending, so here, we'll come in here, right? So here's our front, right here. So the first thing when you're dealing with trees like this, it's like, what is the point of greatest limitation? Like that's kind of what you have to start with. But the first thing I would do before I do that is I would try to I have to see, like, can I go down any further? Because sometimes, like, you'll go down, these will, like, there'll be inverse taper, and you just have a taproot, right? So that's something that you sometimes have to deal with. But I would see, like, this may just be able to come down, like maybe this is still the soil line. We'll still have to pull some of this down. But, like, the greatest point of limitation is probably how deep this is, right? So it's like I'll go down from the top first, but then this, like, see how high this is also? It's like if I'm gonna keep this here, and ideally when I put it into a bonsai container, it would be flat. Like the bottom would be flat. And so what I would need to do is take this top down, bring this bottom up, so we can get it as flat as we can, and then, like, this is gonna have to come in, right? So it's like start on the top, and then on this, come from the back down, bottom up, right? And so then you kind of will start to see, part of it's like, well, what roots have grown in there? These tend to, once they're established, I found they tend to, like, they'll grow a lot of roots. So, I don't know, does that answer your question or no?
Yeah.
It does. So I'm going to go here to here, which means I can run this out here. Yeah, so what kind of container do you put it in? Like, one of the things I do a lot is like multi-apex kind of alpine type trees. You know, that's one thing, like with studying with Ryan, more of like this alpine form. This is pretty traditional. You know, like this is not, I don't feel, and it's like, that's just kind of how it kind of came together, but I feel like this is a little more traditional. So I think, well, I still want some feedback on what kind of container, so I'm not gonna.
I go with a dark, rounded rectangle that has a roughness to it. Looks like rocks. And I've seen those that they're the indentations that look really rough in different strategic locations around the pot.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, I like the rectangle, little more masculine feel to it. Yeah, but with like the rounded edges, is that what you're? Yeah. I know I'm a big fan of those type of
Got
containers.
a couple of spots, I just don't know what to call them. You know?
Yeah, it's like a soft edged,
Yeah, but in between-
rounded.
In between, there's these rough areas that are indented
Is it like the worm-eaten ones?
no.
Are they're Japanese?
Yeah.
Japanese containers?
I got them from Madeline. I don't know if you know them or not.
Yeah.
How
I know
strictly-
Matt.
Todd, how strictly do you follow the glazed versus unglazed pots for these concerts?
I mean, it depends, right? So if it's, I don't know if I'd put this in like a blue glazed container, but I mean, some of the, like even some of the wood-fired containers, like they look like they have like a glaze on them, like the Tom Bendas, you know, it's like, I'd put anything in a Tom Benda. I'd put deciduous, I'd put, you know, depending on like the deciduous tree, like maybe like a rough bark maple or a like sageu elm or a cork bark elm, I think would all look good in like a wood-fired. Horst Heinzelreiter, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he's from Austria. He has like he kind of airbrushes textures, like his containers already are textured, but then he'll airbrush like very kind of earth tone colors on them. So they're like a glaze too, but I mean, spruces and conifers just are to die for in his containers, you know? So I think it depends on, like Roy Minari, I don't know if I would put a conifer in any, I don't know if you know who he is, like he has very, like charismatic, very bright colors. They're beautiful containers. Whether I'd put a conifer in one, probably not. So I think it depends on the glaze. I'm not adverse, I bought some Byron Myrick containers, I think he's from Arkansas, but his glazes they're not shiny, you know, so I think after either he buys a matte finish I don't know, or some people will sandblast once the glazes are done, you know, and the pots are out, they'll sandblast it to kind of get a matte finish on the glazes, and those I would put almost anything into those. So if it looks cool, then cool. You know, that's kind of my rule of thumb. It's like if I think it looks cool, then I'll put whatever into it. All right, let's see where we're at. All right, so we just have this branch and the apex to wire here.
Basic differences.
What do you think about glazes?
I was a traditionalist for a long time. I learned it and I followed it, and I found a couple people. I used to be in Chicago. We had some local artists there in the club, and I was really attracted to sort of forest green glaze.
Uh-huh.
Conifers and they were with that matte finish.
Uh-huh.
Her name was Carolyn, and I can't remember her last name. It's been a few years. But then, so I kind of broke out of the mold. One thing I have not yet done, because I can't quite figure it out, you know what they call those eggshell pots that are canted over on one side and be elongated on the tall side. Can't quite figure out how to situate the tree in there. But in terms of glazed versus unglazed, I've softened my approach. I don't have any deciduous trees in unglazed pots.
You don't have any
Deciduous in unglazed pots.
I mean, so that's my thing too. I don't. I say that. So I had an aspen in an unglazed pot, but also the aspens have like that white bark, but then like the black bark, and it's really like it's very rough. So I had an aspen in an unglazed pot, but other than that, I think I'm with you on that. I think it works like conifers into glazes, but I think deciduous into unglazed, I don't think it works as well.
I have a little Japanese black pine, little, you know, one of those with the little in-twisted trunks, little short, dwarfy things.
Uh-huh,
And it's in a glazed pot. It's absolutely beautiful.
uh-huh.
But what about bald cypress or Don redwood? Where would you classify them?
What was the question?
Bald cypress or Don redwoods.
Oh. I have one that's still in its plastic pot. I can't answer that question.
Because a lot of people don't like to put, you know, the glazes because of the color change, you know, but they change colors, but.
I mean, I think I would put it in, I would be more apt to put those trees into a glazed container of some kind than unglazed. So,
Because of the color change, or?
What's that?
What would be your reasoning?
I mean, part of it, it's like, I like that change, you know, and it's like the changing color and with like a because it's like, okay, the foliage is this beautiful green, and then the fall, it's like this, like it's a brown or a yellow, and it's like, well, that's really a nice change, and
So
it's
you
like
want,
that.
like, contrast it?
I think the contrast is great,
Yeah.
you know, so it's like, that's what,
I like that too.
yeah. I mean, so part of it when you're talking glazes and conifers, like one of the first things I ever saw was like I was at Ryan's, and he had like a juniper, a Rocky Mountain juniper in a white horsed Heinzelreiter container, right? And it's like, well, no, you put junipers in like red containers, you know, so it's like you get that pop. But like one of the things that you could do or look at, it's like, well, do you want the container to be something that contrasts with the tree, or do you want it to be something that like almost blends in with the tree? So it's like having this white container with all this white deadwood, it's like the container is more subtle instead of having like a red container that really pops. So it's like, I think you get to play, you can play with colors more, you know, when it comes to situations like that. So. All right, we have about 3 wires left, I
Can we talk about those eggshell boxes?
think. Eggshell pots?
Yeah, I thought mainly they were used for like semi-cascades, smaller trees, and they kind of tumbled out.
Eggshells where you're up here?
Yeah, they kind of tumbled out with the eggshell.
I mean, they can. Also, like I had a Doug fir that Mark Nolander did for the ABS BCI show for a demo in 2012. And it's like an upright.
How big's the eggshell?
I mean,
Oh.
he wanted a bit. I didn't put it in an eggshell, but when he drew it, that was his suggestion, was an eggshell, and it was like upright. But yeah, I mean, I think too, eggshells, because there's so much mass. So I think it's something good where if you have a tree that really like flows out a long way and it needs a container that would really help stabilize it, I think an eggshell would look good with one of those too, you know. Yeah, that's the thing too with containers. It's like, how heavy of a container, you know, because there are some containers that are very, you know, they're light and they're thin, and maybe that's better for a tree that's a little more delicate, whether it's masculine or feminine, you know, whether it's a rectangle or an oval, you know, so there's things like that, or there's containers that are very heavy. I have some containers from a guy in Austria. He's from Austria too. His name's Lubo Skoda. And like some of his containers look like barnacles and different things like that. And it's like, okay, for a container like that, you need a tree that's a little, I don't know, has a little more substance to it, because too, his clay body is so heavy and it's very thick, you know, so that kind of comes across as well. So. I don't like that. So I'm gonna fix that after I put one more piece of wire on this.
Now that the tree is shaping up, like, can you talk about what you expect for the future of this tree? Like, I don't know, strengths you might want to emphasize or weaknesses you need to deal with in the future? Like, I don't know, what would you expect in, you know?
I mean, so I think like at the moment, this tree, I don't know, it's fairly sparse, right? So this will fill in. I don't necessarily want the tree to get any bigger, you know? And so, because this feels like a nice size for the tree. I think like for perspective too, for the like size of the trunk and everything, this feels, I don't know, this feels in scale. But yeah, we'll look at it here once we're done. It's like, okay, are there any points, like when we're looking, like are there any areas that are like this branch is in line with this? Can we change that? Or like, is there enough motion to the right? Do we need to push out? Is there too much to the right? And do we need to push in eventually? So we'll look at that. We'll look at that. So this goes this way. All right, one more piece of wire. Yeah, so when I'm done with this tomorrow, I'll shelter this, shade it a little more. And then what I'm going to do too is I will take, I'll take some BioGold and I'll put it in probably 4 locations, maybe take 8 pieces in each location, but I'll put it on like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So we have 4 locations, and then once that's gone, right, or like maybe in a month or 2 months, what I'll do is if we're here and here are 2, then I'll go like here and here for 2, right? So then I'll just rotate it, but I'll fertilize this with BioGold, which is a 6-4-5 or something like that, and that's like a slow release. And so I'll fertilize that. I'll keep this protected for a bit and just see. So this could, where we're at, and because I took off this could set buds and push again this year, but it'll be that juvenile growth, okay? And so I'm okay with that, because that's what these do sometimes. And it's like, well, that's a Pinyon.
Would you let those run and then do selection of what to keep and what to pull out next spring, or would you select?
Nope, I'll just leave all of it. I'll leave all of it, and then next spring, all those buds will just push. So that's the thing on this. It's like I'm not gonna touch this for a couple years, or at least we'll see. But my guess is like next year, whatever it sets for this year. Here. So here's the tree. So we're right in there. So there's the tree, okay? Here, right into here. So it's like, yeah, it's a pretty nice bonsai tree, you know? but yeah, so I'm not gonna do like a black pine technique to where, like, I'm gonna set stuff, even if it pushes juvenile again, I'm not gonna go in, I'm not gonna select anything. For the rest of this year, I'm hands off. I'm just gonna fertilize it. And then next year, if it does push juvenile this year, that's fine. The buds that it sets this year, I know will push regular adult foliage needles next year. That's what they do. We'll see if it doesn't push another flush this year. We'll see. My guess is, regardless, there will be areas in here that'll push some juvenile next year. So they're very interesting, trees that still, it's like we're still trying to figure out, some portions of it. So.
Will you repot it in the spring?
I don't know, to be honest. Like normally at this time of year, because it's early August, I may. What I'll do is I will look to see what happens after this work. And it's like maybe I go next spring and do it. Maybe I may give it one more year and just let it push out for, if it does it this year, push out next year, and just wait and do it in 2025. Which sounds so far away, but it'll be here in no time. So. Yeah, well, it'll depend on how the tree responds. Any other questions? No? Yeah, this was fun. Taking this off was a good call. Shortening this was a good call. So it's like it feels very, very in scale and very appropriate to the tree. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
Nice job.
I'm sure everyone's ready to call it a night, but make sure you get an up-close view of the beautiful pinyon before it disappears. And hopefully we'll get to see it again in a show at some
Yeah.
point. Thank you guys all for coming. Any new members, if you're interested in being a mentee, see myself or Patrick, the membership chair. We'll get you set up.
When? I mean, my guess is if maybe a month, maybe less. We'll see what temperatures are like. If temperatures are going to go back into the 90s, I'll keep it protected. If it's going to stay in like those 80s or so, it's like I'm doing it. Well, too, because where all my trees are now in the structure right now, it gets 30% shade, and so too, like over the day.